What if I told you that it is possible to make this Sonos Arc sound like an 8-foot long soundbar? And what does that mean? It means much more spacious soundstage as well as great stereo performance for music. And what if I told you that it can be done for just $3, $3 US? So hey guys, my name is Peter. I'm based in Singapore. I am a Sonos fanboy and a wireless audiophile. Now, before we go on to today's topic, we need to talk about what is the problem with today's soundbar, right? Soundbars, at the max, they are maybe just over 4 feet long, like this Sonos Arc Ultra that I have in front here. It is about 120 cm, so about 4 feet or so. Cannot remember the exact numbers, but that is the limit of soundbars. Most soundbars, right? This is a 55-inch TV, and you will see that the soundbar fits the 55-inch TV quite perfectly. If you have a 65-inch TV, yes, possibly you can get a larger soundbar, a wider soundbar, a longer soundbar, but you know, beyond a certain length, it's just gonna look rather silly. Now, in traditional home theater systems or even in stereo channel, 2-channel setups, when you are listening to music, when you want to play something back, you want soundstage, you want imaging. And for that, you actually place the speakers quite far apart. Now, you're gonna be very hard-pressed to find a setup that has the speakers placed only 4 feet apart. That is gonna sound quite constrained, like, you know, the soundstage is narrow, and that is exactly the problem with soundbars today. But today, we're gonna do this. We're gonna use a software called Sonosequencr. Now, this is a third-party app. It's not sanctioned by Sonos, so there's no guarantee that it will work for your system, and I don't know if it's gonna cause any problems with your system, but I downloaded the software. It works. You do need an iOS device to run it, and it cost me $3.99 Singapore dollars. Now, the installation of the software, it is a bit finicky, but I'll get to that in just a little bit. So before we go on, I have to clarify, not that it's just gonna cost you $3 to set up this soundbar to sound like a very, very wide speaker, but the problem is you do need to have a couple of Sonos speakers lying around which you're not using for any other purposes. So let's move ahead right to what we have here. Now, behind me, this is the Sonos IKEA Symphonics speaker. This is the lamp, the table lamp, right? So Sonos and IKEA, they've kind of like broke the partnership. They're no longer working together, but I do have this. I have the picture frame, which is actually right here behind me. And I also have the bookshelf speakers. I have a couple of old Play 3s and the Play 1s. So I do have a couple of these speakers lying around. So if I were to try that, the only thing I need to do is to pay the $3 for the Sonos sequencing software. Now, your mileage may differ, and if you're gonna have to run out to buy extra Sonos speakers just to do this, I probably won't recommend it. But, you know, for me and for some of you, the downside is at the most $3. So what does Sonosequencr do? Sonosequencr is basically a piece of software that it passes instructions to the Sonos system. Now, we have to be a little bit careful here. You can think of Sonosequencr like a remote control for the S2 app. So whatever the S2 app can do or has the code that is built into it, it will be able to control. So you can set up some kind of like activities or shortcuts to automate the process of setting the surround volume, a couple of things, right? But what is important today is it basically allows you to pair your front speakers into the Sonos Arc setup, right? So the Sonos Arc Ultra that I have here, it is playing the left and right channel from the left and right drivers in the array in the Sonos Arc Ultra itself. But what we have done and what we are using Sonosequencr to do is to actually add this speaker as the right channel. And there's another speaker over there, which is the IKEA Symphonics lamp. It is the left speaker. So let's get to it and let's see how we can go about doing it. So after you download the software, there are a series of permissions that Sonosequencr will ask you, and basically just allow for everything. If you don't like that, you can actually change the permissions later, but just for the purpose of getting in fast, you just allow everything, right? And what you do from there, you do actually have to take note, the software is not super friendly, right? It doesn't give a lot of instructions, and the interface is kind of like bleh. It's mostly text, and it is not very intuitive to use. But I'm here to help you, right? So one of the first things you need to do is, if you have the Sonos Arc Ultra or the Sonos Arc or any soundbar that you have, right? The first thing you want to do is to unpair the subs that you have linked to it and unpair the surround speakers that you have linked to it. So in my particular case, I have a Sub Gen 3 and a Sub 4, as well as a pair of Era 300S, the surround speakers that is paired in with the Arc Ultra. So I break up that configuration, I remove the subs, and I remove the surround speakers, right? Then you're done, right? And that is done using the S2 app. Don't use the Sonosequencr app to do that. So the moment you launch Sonosequencr, you go and list all your devices, go into the Arc Ultra, and what you do first is to actually add in the left and the right front speakers. So in my particular case, this is the IKEA Symphonic Slam, right? I have the left and I have the right. So make sure you label them so that you know which is which that you are going into. And basically, you use Sonosequencr to add this as the left channel and use the other one as the right channel. And what it effectively does is to disable the left channel and the right channel on your Sonos Ultra soundbar and play the sound, the left and the right channel respectively, through this table lamp itself. Now the next thing you want to do is to then go into the Sonos S2 app itself and add back the Era 300 as the surround speakers and add back your Sub Gen 3 and your Sub 4. Now you can do that. You may only have one sub, which is fine. Don't use the Sonosequencr app to add in the subs and the surround. It doesn't really work very well. Now the software, when you add in, right, there is a counter that goes down from 45 seconds. You can wait or you can cancel. It really doesn't matter. And basically the counter is there just to hold you and make sure that you understand that there is some degree of interaction that needs to happen between the Sonosequencr app and the Sonos S2 itself to link those speakers. Now, when you go into the Sonos S2 app, you will notice one thing. The table lamps, they are now linked in as front speakers. So if you think about the code within the S2 app itself, it actually has that functionality. It identifies these two speakers that are paired into the Sonos S2 app as the front speakers. Now, there's not much you can do about that. You cannot change the levels, you cannot control the channel sensitivity independently, but just think about it, right? Sonos actually has that code built in, right? Sonos doesn't know about the existence of the Sonosequencr app on my phone, but it does recognize these two speakers, which are now paired into the system as the front speakers. Now, before we go on to talk about how it sounds, I want to talk about a couple of limitations. So, there are some limitations when it comes to that, right? So I do have a pair of Sonos amps. The Sonos amps are actually driving my ceiling speakers. And when I tried to pair them, I wanted to use that as surround system. And you cannot actually do that. You cannot use a Sonos amp as the left and the right, because when Sonosequencr sees that, it sees actually a single amp. Although it has two channels, it sees it as one speaker. So you kind of like need two amps to drive one speaker each. Well, maybe there's a workaround around that, but I haven't actually gone into that. So you cannot add the independent channels on the Sonos amp into this setup. So that's limitation number one. Now, I also thought that, hey, is there a way to then add the Sub Mini together with a Sub Gen 3 or a Sub 4, the bigger version? Well, actually, you cannot do that. Now, as I mentioned before, Sonosequencr doesn't actually lend you any new functionalities. It unlocks the functionality that the Sonos app already has inside. So if the Sonos app doesn't have that functionality, it can't really enable that for you. So that's just one thing to note. So when I was trying to add the Sub Mini and the Sub 4 together, of course it didn't work because Sonos doesn't support that configuration on its own. So just think of Sonosequencr as kind of like, a remote control of sorts. If the functionality is not supported, the remote control ain't going to do anything about it. The other thing that I mentioned earlier is that the user interface isn't great. The whole system is like mostly text-based. It is not very clear what you can do, what you need to do, and the terminology that they use, be it a section, I can't remember what it is, but basically Sonosequencr itself, it is not a sanctioned Sonos app, and it doesn't carry the same degree of polish that the Sonos S2 app has. Although I know at this point some of you are going to talk crap and shit about the Sonos S2 app and say it's bad, but if you think that the S2 app is bad, you cannot be singing praises of the Sonosequencr app. It is just not that polished. But understandably, it came from an independent developer, and he's giving us the functionality to uncover the left and the right, the front speaker pairing that Sonos has buried deep in the code. It was part of a beta program many years ago. They took away the functionality, so you cannot really access it through their system, but the bits of code is still inside, which, you know, dangerous because Sonos might deprecate that piece of code at some point in time in the future, and you'll be left without a solution. But what is your downside? It is $3. So like I said, I did a trial and error. The adding and the adding of the speaker is not that straightforward. You do have to use step 1, the S2 app, to remove the surrounds and the subs. Then step 2, you go into Sonosequencr app to add the left and the right channel speakers into the Sonos Arc Ultra setup. Then step 3, you quit the Sonosequencr app, go back into the Sonos S2 app to add the sub and the surround speakers back in. So it is kind of convoluted, it's not very well documented, but well, there you go, that's how you set it up. And one major limitation of this is that TruePlay will no longer be available to you. You will go inside the system, you click on TruePlay, it actually shows up, but when it tries to do the TruePlay, it will say that something has gone wrong and you cannot access TruePlay anymore because this configuration is just not supported. So the most important question that we're trying to answer today is there an impact to the sound? Well, first things first, if you are dependent on TruePlay, if your room is badly treated, or you are in a space where you really depend on TruePlay, then you cannot use this setup because TruePlay won't work, and then your sound is going to be impacted. Now, there is also something about the soundstage, right? So I'll talk about the soundstage in a couple of ways, right? First, the ear level soundstage, the horizontal soundstage, the front, left and right, the front and back, and the rear surrounds, the side surrounds. Now, they're still good, right? They still sound very good. And my God, when the speakers are placed, in my instance, about 8 feet apart, you will find that the front soundstage is super wide. Now, the Sonos Arc Ultra is only going to be playing the center drivers, right? There are 3 drivers in the middle, and the left and the right channel drivers are no longer going to be active. Now, the heights driver, I'll get to that in a while, but the side surround drivers are also still firing. So for the horizontal level, the soundstage is great. Problem is the heights. Now, the height speakers, the heights driver, now I have something here, right? So maybe let me show you what I do, right? So on this particular screen here, when I play the sound, okay, this one here is the left surround. So this file will only pump out left surround channels, and I can then tell where the sound is coming out from. So when you're listening to the heights channel, the left and the right front heights, they are actually coming out from the left and the right speaker, the table lamp, the IKEA Symphonics table lamp itself. So the height channel on the actual Arc itself is actually not firing off. So that is definitely not that ideal. I mean, you're paying quite a bit for the Sonos Arc Ultra, and to deactivate the left and right driver arrays as well as the heights array is probably not the most ideal. And on top of that, you're still going to be adding more speakers. But yes, granted, you do get a super spacious and wide front stage. Now, what is worse is that when it comes to the rear heights channel, now when you play the rear heights channel, what is actually firing off is the Era 300 surrounds and the Arc left side firing speakers. So, the sound kind of like is not supposed to be playing where it's playing. But like I said, it is a limitation on the Sonos. Sonos didn't plan for this configuration, and when Sonosequencr is actually tapping on it, like I said, it is a remote. It doesn't add extra functionality. It can only do what the Sonos is programmed to do, and it's like a remote configuration too. So with all that in mind, like ultimately we have to think about, in real world use cases, how does it sound? So there are two main users, right? When we set up our Sonos system. The first will be for cinema. Now, cinema, I actually do find it quite a bit more enjoyable. There is less height effects, but the soundstage is super huge. When you're looking at things and they're panning from the left to the right, the soundstage is just incredibly wide. You cannot get that with any other sound bars that is out in the market today. Well, with the exception of maybe the Sony A9 speakers, where they have independent left and right channels for front left and right, and as well as rear left and right. But in a soundbar format, I mean, this setup, I don't think it can be rivaled at this moment, and all this for an investment of $3. Again, assuming that you have speakers lying around that you're not using. Don't go out and buy new speakers for this setup, because I think the setup is still a little bit finicky, and in the long term, I don't know how much of it is still going to retain its support in the long run. Now, when it comes to music, if you're listening to music through a soundbar, you will know how constrained, how constricted the soundstage is. Why? Because the drivers are just 3 plus, maybe at the most, I'll give you 4 feet apart, right? And it uses the side-firing channels, side-firing drivers to actually throw sound to simulate a wider soundstage, but it is not actually physically wide apart. Now, in this setup where I have the IKEA table lamp set 8 feet apart, then I am actually getting the sound from really just speakers and drivers that are set 8 feet apart. So when you're listening to music, it is great. Now, if your setup involves surround speakers, then you might want to go into your Sonos S2 app and bring the surround levels down to -5, -10, -15, right? So that the sounds in stereo, when you're listening to music, it's just coming from the speakers itself. Now today, I've only used the Symphonics table lamp as the speakers. Now there are more capable drivers out there, and more capable Sonos speakers, right? You have the Sonos 5s, which are going to be amazing. I have the Sonos 1s, the Play 1s. I also have a pair of Play 3s, which I can add on. There's also the picture frame, and where the hell is my bookshelf here? Somewhere around. So there are many configurations that you can add to this. I am just thinking that in the long-term future, one of the things that I would think that I want Sonosequencr to do, but I know they cannot, is to add the height channel mapping as well as the center channel mapping. So you think about it, I wanted to pair my Sonos amp driving my in-ceiling speakers. If I could route the height channel to those speakers, then I have true voice of God sound that is coming from the ceiling, rather than using the reflection that is coming from the Era 300 or the Arc Ultra itself. But that is unlikely to be supported because Sonos itself is not supporting that functionality. Same goes for the center channel. I would want to put a large beefy Sonos 5s inside, right in front, and to have the sound come up from there, because the Sonos 5, they are great speakers and they're great for vocals, especially when you're listening to music. And if you could do that, then it would have been a beautiful setup, but it is not something that Sonos support, and thus Sonosequencr, there's nothing that the developer can do to make that happen. Now, the last thing that I want to give you before we part for this video is that this functionality is kind of like a loophole. So Sonosequencr is actually using the loophole. The code is actually within the Sonos S2 app itself, or maybe within the firmware for the Sonos devices itself. So if Sonos decides to patch that or to deprecate that section of code, then the functionality is then going to be gone, right? So you cannot use this in kind of the long run. Ideally, Sonos, if you're listening to us, please add support for us to route multiple channels and bake it right into the Sonos app or right into the firmware itself to enable us to do that. We would love to do that, and that will make us buy more of your speakers. You don't want that? You want that, don't you? Right? So if you do think that you can sell more, please, I've been asking for this feature for the last 5 years, and maybe you can enable that on the Pinewood TV streamer, which, where is it? Well, till then, I'll see you in my other videos that I've linked up here.